The marriage ended with 6 words. I want a divorce. I expected tears. I expected anger. I expected him to stand up, grab my hand, and tell me we could still fix us. Instead, he looked at me for only a second. Then he quietly said, "Okay." That single word destroyed me more than any argument ever could. If you're wondering why a woman would regret asking for a divorce only moments after saying the words, let me tell you exactly what happened. Because what I thought would be the hardest day of my life turned into the day I realized I had completely misunderstood the man sitting across from me. 2 days earlier, I had already made my decision. Or at least I convinced myself I had. I texted our marriage counselor and asked for an emergency appointment. I didn't want to tell my husband alone. I needed someone else in the room in case everything exploded. In my head, I had already imagined every possible reaction. He'd cry. He'd beg. He'd promise to change. Maybe he'd finally tell me everything I'd spent years hoping to hear. For 10 years, I'd carried around this feeling that something was missing. Not betrayal, not abuse, not another woman. Just emptiness. He was loyal, responsible, an incredible father, the kind of man everyone admired. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling seen. I convinced myself that divorce was the only answer. So I walked into that counseling office determined to end my marriage. The room felt freezing. Neither of us spoke. My husband kept his hands folded together while staring at the floor. Our therapist finally broke the silence. "Jamie, would you like to begin?" The words wouldn't come. Then suddenly they did. I want a divorce." The moment the sentence left my mouth, I burst into tears. Years of frustration poured out all at once. I couldn't even look at him. I waited. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10, nothing. No movement, no tears, no shouting. He simply sat there without changing his expression. Even our therapist looked surprised. Finally, she turned toward him. "Would you like to respond?" He didn't hesitate. "Okay. Just, okay." Then he added quietly, "If that's what you want, we'll move forward." That was it. No fight, no questions, no desperate attempt to save us. For some reason, his calmness hurt more than if he'd screamed. A tiny part of me had secretly wanted proof that losing me would destroy him. Instead, he accepted it. And somehow that acceptance shattered every bit of confidence I'd had walking into that room. That night was painfully quiet. We drove home in separate silence. He slept on the couch. I barely slept at all. Every hour I kept expecting him to walk into the bedroom, to ask if we could talk, to tell me he didn't want this. Morning came. Nothing. I went to work exhausted. All day my phone stayed silent. No messages, no missed calls, no emotional paragraphs begging me to reconsider. Nothing. By the time I got home, I almost convinced myself he was simply giving me space. Then I walked into the living room. He was sitting on the couch, playing PlayStation, as if it were any ordinary Tuesday. I sat beside him. 24 hours had passed since I asked for a divorce. Finally, I whispered, "Can we talk about yesterday?" He didn't pause the game. What's there to talk about? The question caught me completely off guard. I stared at him. I mean, what happens now? Still looking at the screen, he answered calmly. "I already rented an apartment." My heart stopped. I transferred my paycheck. I removed my name from the lease. I've started the paperwork. Every sentence felt like another door slamming shut. It had only been 1 day. 1 day. Yet somehow he had already begun building a life without me. I suddenly realized something terrifying. He hadn't accepted losing me. He had accepted that I'd already left long before saying the words. Driving to work the next morning, I couldn't stop replaying everything. Had he been preparing for this? Had he known? Or had he simply reached the point where he was too exhausted to keep fighting? People often think the loudest person in a relationship is the one hurting the most. Sometimes it's the quiet one, the one who stops arguing, stops chasing, stops explaining, not because they don't care, but because they've cared for too long. That thought haunted me. Friends later asked if he'd shown any emotion. The truth is, he did, just not in front of me. Months later, I learned he'd cried alone after signing the lease. He cried while packing boxes. He cried after putting our wedding photos into storage. He simply refused to use those tears to change my mind. His love wasn't loud, it was respectful. If I wanted to leave, he would let me. That realization hurt more than anything. Around that same time, social media was flooded with stories of people ending marriages over the smallest things. One woman even claimed artificial intelligence convinced her husband was cheating after reading coffee grounds left inside his mug. She believed it, filed for divorce, destroyed her family over something completely imaginary. Watching stories like that made me wonder how many people were throwing away real relationships while chasing answers that never existed. Maybe I wasn't that different. No, I hadn't believed coffee grounds, but I had believed that happiness had to exist somewhere outside my marriage. Maybe the problem wasn't only him. Maybe I had spent years searching for a version of myself that I hadn't even found yet. How could someone truly love me for being myself when I didn't even know who that person was anymore? Weeks passed. The house felt emptier than I imagined. The kids noticed everything: the silence, the separate bedrooms, the forced smiles. Even the dog waited by the front door every evening. I kept asking myself the same question. Had I really wanted freedom? Or had I simply wanted connection? Because those aren't always the same thing. For the first time in years, I stopped blaming my husband for every feeling I couldn't explain. I started looking inward, and what I found terrified me. I wasn't running away from him. I had been running away from myself. By the time I finally understood that, he was already gone. The apartment was furnished, the divorce papers were nearly complete, his life had started moving forward, mine had only just stopped long enough to understand what I'd lost. The hardest lesson wasn't realizing he could live without me, it was realizing I had waited until he finally let go, to remember why I fell in love with him in the first place. And standing outside his new apartment one rainy evening, staring at the light glowing through his window, I raised my hand to knock. Was not knowing that what I was about to see on the other side of that door would change everything.